Welcome back, my friends of literature and cinema. Before we step into the winds, I want to ask you to pause and support Cinema Vault with a like and a subscribe. It might seem small, but it's the only way these intellectual explorations keep thriving. What you are about to experience is not a review in the usual sense. It's a narrative, an analysis told as a story, where cinema is treated like memory, philosophy, and poetry all at once. The film Twisters 2024 does not enter gently. It inherits the legacy of its 1996 predecessor, and yet it feels like meeting an old storm with new eyes. From the moment the screen flickered alive, I was pulled back into a strange kind of nostalgia. Memories of first encounters with disaster cinema, the sound of windows rattling in childhood, the hush that precedes a thunderclap, that eerie calm when birds vanish and the world seems to hold its breath. The movie begins in that same silence, not with chaos, but with patience. We see plains stretching forever, the sky too big for comfort, the fragility of barns and small towns that look like they could be peeled away from the earth with a single gust. There is something intoxicating about the way this film builds anticipation. Storms are not flung at us immediately. They are foreshadowed with shadows on the horizon, uneasy radio chatter, the restless gaze of characters who know too much to be reassured by a quiet sky. We are invited to feel the weight of inevitability, and it becomes clear early on that the movie wants to remind us of one truth. Storms are never just weather, they are mirrors. They reflect our flaws, our obsessions, our arrogance in thinking we can harness or predict what will always outpace us. The story turns around a new generation of storm chasers. Some are there for science, with equipment and models and theories. Others are there for glory, filming disasters to feed online followings. And caught between them is a figure who grounds a film. A young meteorologist shaped by loss. Someone who's passive and twisted as violently as any funnel cloud. This character is not chasing storms merely to study them or to thrill at their power. They are chasing something internal, a reconciliation with grief, a chance to make sense of chaos. That mix of personal trauma and external destruction sets the emotional stakes higher than any radar warning ever could. The plot moves with the rhythm of approaching weather. At first, the chases are almost rehearsals, small storms, minor collisions of ego and ambition. Rival groups clash over territory, over methods, over whose purpose is more justifiable. In these moments, the storms are backdrops, but as the narrative swells, the weather begins to dominate, reshaping not just landscapes but relationships. What felt at first like rivalry becomes interdependence, and what looked like recklessness begins to reveal glimpses of courage. But the film saves its teeth for later. The central twist, the one that takes your breath, is not a single tornado. It is many converging, colliding, forming something far beyond what anyone, scientist or influencer, had prepared for. The arrogance of control, the illusion that technology or daring could tame nature, collapses in the face of a storm that doesn't merely spin, but multiplies. It is a sequence staged not as spectacle alone, but as reckoning. Buildings fall, vehicles scatter. But what hits hardest are betrayals and sacrifices between people. The realization that in the storm's roar, truth emerges unfiltered. And that is where the promise of the film lies. It is not only about what storms destroy, but about what they reveal. Who runs? Who stays? Who betrays? Who saves? Twisters offers us destruction, yes, but more importantly, it offers us revelation. This is our opening step into the analysis. We have sketched the inheritance of the story, glimpsed the outlines of its characters, and teased at the moments where spectacle and humanity collide. From here, the journey deepens. We will walk slowly through the full length of the plot, one half at a time, before unraveling the fragile humanity at its center, the strange truths behind its making, the thematic bones under its flesh. But for now, it is enough to have felt the tremor of anticipation, the silence before the scream, the heartbeat before the wind touches down. The storm is not here yet, but it is coming, and we are already inside its pull. The film begins quietly, the way storms often do, with skies that seem calm but are already swelling with unspoken threats. We are introduced to the young meteorologist whose grief is braided into every glance at the horizon. This character, still scarred by a past encounter with a tornado that shattered more than just homes, moves through early scenes with a heaviness that feels unshakable. They study the weather with precision, yet their eyes reveal something more than science, a personal reckoning with forces that once took everything. These opening passages set the tone. Storms here are not simply natural disasters. They are embodiments of memory, trauma, and fate. Soon the world of storm chasing unfolds before us. Trucks modified with steel plating, radar dishes strapped to their roofs, drones that whirl into skies, and maps plastered across dashboards glowing with colored warnings. One group emerges as the veterans, led by a seasoned chaser whose career has spanned decades. Their purpose is rooted in research and in saving lives through better prediction. They move with caution, every decision weighed against the knowledge that storms are merciless and exacting. Their leader is a figure hardened by loss but tempered with responsibility, someone who commands respect even when their body shows the wear of years spent in pursuit of danger. In sharp contrast comes another group, younger, brasher, louder. They chase for spectacle, not data. Their vehicles are emblazoned with logos, cameras mounted on every angle, streams broadcasting their every move to hungry audiences online. They are as much performers as they are chasers, feeding on adrenaline and likes. When they plunge toward a funnel cloud, their excitement is raw, manic, and dangerously careless. They represent the hunger of a modern world that treats catastrophe as content, as shareable thrill. The young meteorologist stands caught between these two poles, drawn by the discipline and duty of the veteran team, but also tempted by the raw energy of the influencer chasers. They become a hinge around which the plot begins to turn. Their own reasons to join the chase are not entirely clear at first to those around them, but the audience is given fragments. Moment of hesitation when sirens wail, flashes of the past when thunder rolls, a hand trembling on a steering wheel as lightning forks across the horizon. The early storms act like prologues, each one a rehearsal for what is to come. The first chase introduces us to mechanics, radar screens lighting up with dense cells, tense shouts over radios, convoys hurtling down country roads while towns hunker under warnings. The veteran team keeps distance, measuring, calibrating, while the influencer group barrels straight into danger, filming debris swirling around them with reckless glee. In these moments, the cinematography stretches wide, giving us both the grandeur of the sky and the fragility of those beneath it. But storms are not only tests of courage. They are also crucibles of loyalty. Early in the film, we see fractures form. A young influencer, eager to impress, pushes too far, causing near disaster and sowing resentment within their group. On the veteran side, old scars resurface, with murmurs of past colleagues lost to storms creating tension among the team. And hovering always is the meteorologist, who begins to see both sides as mirrors of their own divided self, the disciplined scientist they long to be, and the reckless soul who still wants to defy fate and stare into a vortex that destroyed them. The first half of the story builds steadily, each storm more ferocious than the last, each chase bringing the groups closer to collision. At one point, both teams converge on the same storm cell, and what begins as competition turns into chaos. Vehicles race side by side, engines roaring, drivers shouting. The wind rises around them like an animal too big for the screen. Lightning crashes in white veins across the sky. Hail pounds against metal. And in a moment of hubris, the influencer team positions themselves directly in the storm's path to capture the shot. The meteorologist, watching this unfold, is torn between disgust at their recklessness and a strange recognition of their own compulsion to face danger head-on. It is in this chase that the first true tragedy strikes. A miscalculation leads to destruction, and someone does not make it out. The sequence is filmed with unbearable intimacy, metal screaming, glass shattering, a figure disappearing into wind and debris while the camera holds just long enough for us to feel the weight of silence after. This moment reshapes everything. Rivalries harden into blame. Fear deepens into obsession, and the meteorologist's haunted past flares violently into the present. From here, the film begins to shift its tone. What seemed like a thrilling dance with weather becomes something darker, more ominous. The storms themselves seem to grow angrier, more frequent, their power escalating beyond what even the most seasoned experts predict. Discussions among scientists hint at climate change, at shifting patterns no longer bound by the rules they once trusted. The Earth itself feels restless, unpredictable, unwilling to be mapped. The characters, too, begin to fray. Friendships strain under guilt. Leaders question their choices, and the lure of fame pushes some to reckless extremes. The meteorologist finds themselves increasingly drawn toward the center, compelled by something greater than science, more primal than grief. Each glance at the sky feels like a challenge, an invitation, a call to step closer even when instinct demands retreat. And with each passing storm, it becomes clear that the line between chaser and chased, between predator and prey, is dissolving. The first half of the film closes with a sequence that feels like a crescendo, but is really only the beginning. Both groups, against their better judgment, find themselves drawn to a massive storm system forming in the plains. A storm unlike any they have seen. Radar screens glitch with impossible readings. Winds rise before the funnels even touch ground, and the land itself seems to groan under the weight of what is coming. As convoys rush toward it, as sirens wail across counties, as skies blacken and the first shapes of vortices twist downward, the meteorologist stares with a mixture of terror and longing. This is the storm they have been chasing all along, the storm that promises not just destruction but revelation. The screen fills with motion, vehicles spinning, trees uprooted, structures collapsing, and then cuts to black, leaving us suspended in the roar. The first half ends not with resolution, but with rupture. The storm has arrived, and it has not yet revealed what it will take. The blackout that ended the first half does not linger in silence for long. The second half of Twisters, 2024, begins with chaos unspooled. The storm still raging as if the earth itself had cracked open. We see towns shredded, power lines tangled like broken strings, vehicles upended and scattered across fields. Survivors crawl out of wreckage, their faces smeared with dirt and disbelief, as though they awoken inside someone else's nightmare. Among them are our storm chasers, shaken, divided, but alive, each of them now forced to confront not just the scale of destruction, but the consequences of their own choices. The influencer team, once loud and brazen, is now fractured. The death in the first half lingers in every glance between them, in the silence that replaces their usual bravado. Cameras dangle broken, streams cut off mid-broadcast, and the followers who once cheered them on are now only numbers on screens they can't bear to look at. Their leader, one so sure that fame was worth the risk, begins to unravel under guilt, though pride keeps him from admitting it. A rift forms between those who want to retreat and those who still hunger for the rush of danger. The veteran team fares differently, but not without scars. They regroup methodically, tending to the injured, checking equipment, recalibrating models. Yet their leader carries the weight of command like a stone. In private moments, we see the cracks, hands trembling when no one looks, eyes closing too long, as if haunted by the memory of colleagues lost in storms past. They cling to duty as though it were the only anchor left, reminding the team that their purpose is not thrill but survival, that the data they collect could one day save lives. But even in their steadiness, doubt creeps in. Are they truly helping or simply feeding their obsession with the uncontrollable? At the center remains a meteorologist, the one whose past grief brought them to this path. The devastation reignites every suppressed memory. The loss of family in a storm years ago floods back in jagged images. The sound of a house tearing apart, the cry of a loved one swallowed by the wind, the helplessness of survival when others did not. These recollections blur with the present, making every funnel cloud not just a threat, but a personal confrontation. What began as scientific pursuit has transformed into something closer to destiny, an unspoken vow to face the very force that shaped their life. As the second half unfolds, the storms escalate beyond precedent. Scientists mutter about shifting weather systems, about climate models that no longer apply. Communities brace for waves of destruction, and the chase becomes less about curiosity and more about survival. Sirens wail across counties almost daily, and the line between observer and victim collapses. Chasers who once sped toward storms now find themselves trapped inside them, realizing too late that nature is no longer playing by familiar rules. The meteorologist finds themselves reluctantly stepping into a role neither team expected. Mediator, strategist, reluctant leader. Their ability to read the skies, born not only from training, but from lived trauma, begins to save lives. In one harrowing sequence, they pull both groups back from a deadly miscalculation, guiding them away from converging set of funnels at the last possible second. What might have been annihilation becomes survival, and for the first time, rival groups glimpse the necessity of unity. But the film does not allow easy harmony. Ambition remains. The influencer leader, desperate to reclaim relevance, pushes for one final, spectacular chase, the chance to film the perfect storm, to leave a mark that no one could ignore. The veterans resist, but the temptation proves infectious. Even those who should know better are drawn in, because storms have a way of seducing even the wise. The meteorologist, torn between responsibility and compulsion, tries to hold the line, but deep down, they too feel the pull. This storm, unlike the rest, seems personal, almost as if it has been waiting for them. The climax arrives with a system so vast it dwarfs every storm before. Multiple funnels descend, intertwining, splitting, merging again, a monstrous choreography of destruction. Towns vanish under its path, landscapes are rewritten, and the chasers find themselves not at the edge but swallowed whole. Vehicles are lifted like paper, silos collapse, fire mingles with wind as power lines spark into infernos. The cinematography spares no mercy, plunging us into chaos so overwhelming that even breath feels borrowed. In the heart of the storm, choices are made. The influencer leader, in a moment of redemption, sacrifices themselves to save others, finally understanding too late that survival matters more than spectacle. The veteran leader, battered but unyielding, risks everything to deploy equipment that might finally yield data capable of saving lives in future generations. And the meteorologist, standing in the very place where their past trauma began, faces the vortex with both fear and acceptance. In a moment that fuses memory and present, they do not run. They guide others out, choosing survival not as escape, but as resistance, an affirmation that grief does not have the last word. The storm passes not with neat resolution, but with silence, the kind that feels louder than thunder. Survivors crawl from ditches, hands clasping, eyes stunned by the emptiness where towns once stood. The meteorologist stands among them, changed. The storms have not been conquered. How could they be? But something within has shifted. The obsession is gone, replaced by a clearer, heavier understanding. Storms will always come, and survival is not about mastering them, but about enduring, about choosing life even when the skies rage. The film closes with images of rebuilding, of children running through fields where debris still lies, of skies that seem deceptively calm but alive with memory. The chase does not end, but it transforms. What was once pursuit becomes vigilance. What was once obsession becomes reverence. And as the meteorologist drives away from the wreckage, the horizon stretching endlessly before them, the audience is left with truth both humbling and immense. The storm is never over. It only waits. The heart of this film beats not in the clouds, but in the eyes of its characters. The young meteorologist, who anchors the story, is perhaps the most haunted. They walk through the world with the weight of a tragedy that shaped them, an early encounter with a tornado that tore their family apart and left survival feeling like guilt. Every decision they make is shadowed by that night. They study storms with academic precision, but their gaze betrays something different, something heavier, the desire to face again the force that broke them. Their character is built around contradiction, pulled equally by the discipline of science and compulsion of obsession. What makes them compelling is not their heroism but their fragility. They stumble, they hesitate, they fail, yet they rise each time, not because they conquer fear, but because fear itself becomes a language they understand. The veteran storm chaser, who leads a scientific team, is carved out of weathered steel. They embody the kind of figure who has already buried too many colleagues, who knows the cost of recklessness better than anyone, yet they are no saint. Their sternness masks regret. Their composure hides a near addiction to the chase. Their presence in the film is like the low growl of thunder, steady, ominous, unrelenting. They become mentor and foil to the younger meteorologist, teaching caution while also revealing, perhaps unconsciously, that they too cannot stop. Their journey is one of stubborn endurance, a refusal to let go even as age, loss, and exhaustion erode them. When the final storms come, their willingness to risk everything for knowledge feels less like bravery and more like surrender, as though the storm is the only place they know how to exist. The influencers are painted with louder colors at first, easy to dismiss as caricatures of a modern world that commodifies disaster. Their leader, brash and camera-obsessed, chase a spectacle with a hunger that borders on nihilism. They thrive on the applause of unseen followers, mistaking views and clicks for meaning. But what the film gradually reveals is that even this hunger comes from emptiness. Beneath the bravado is fear. Fear of insignificance. Fear of being forgotten. Their arc bends toward tragedy, but also toward redemption. When they finally act to save others, it feels less like reversal than inevitability, as if even the shallowest soul can be transformed by staring too long into the eye of annihilation. Among their team are fragments of younger lives, adrenaline junkies who treat danger as a stage, who laugh in the face of sirens. Yet as the storms escalate, their laughter fades. They fracture under guilt, bicker, lose faith in their leader. What we see in them is the fragility of youth when tested by forces that cannot be reduced to content. They are not villains but warnings, reflections of a culture that treats catastrophe as theater until catastrophe answers back. Secondary characters populate the film like debris carried on the wind. Locals whose homes are ripped away, children who huddle under stairwells, volunteers who try to rebuild after each disaster. Though they pass quickly across the screen, they anchor the story in human cost. It is in their faces that the audience feels the real stakes, not in data, not in live streams, but in shattered homes and trembling hands. These minor characters remind us that storms do not care who chases them or why. They fall on everyone. The relationships between characters shape the core of the narrative. The meteorologist and the veteran are bound by respect that deepens into something like kinship, each recognizing in the other the shadow of obsession. The meteorologist and the influencers clash like lightning against metal, their contempt obvious, yet their similarities undeniable. They are both pulled by storms for reasons deeper than choice. And within each group, tensions spark. The veterans test their leaders' resolve. The influencers collapse under vanity until the storm itself forces them together. These interactions reveal that the film is less about chasing tornadoes than about the way people fracture and fuse under pressure. The storm does not merely threaten them. It sculpts them. The meteorologist transforms from haunted survivor to reluctant guide, accepting that survival is not shame but resistance. The veteran shifts from teacher to martyr, giving everything to ensure that their lifetime of obsession leaves behind more than memories. The influencer leader, once empty, discovers meaning in sacrifice, proving that even vanity can burn away in the fire of crisis. And the rest, scattered across the wreckage, are shaped not by triumph but by endurance, learning that to live after the storm is its own act of courage. In the end, the characters of Twisters remind us that disaster does not create who we are, it exposes it. Stripped of illusions, shaken free of masks, they reveal themselves in the howl of the wind. Fragile, flawed, desperate, but still clinging to one another, still choosing to stand. And that is why they linger long after the credits, because storms may pass, but the memory of those who face them never fades. What makes Twisters, 2024, fascinating beyond its narrative is the way it exists at the crossroads of legacy and reinvention. One of the strangest truths is that the project itself took decades to rise again. For years after the 1996 original, talk of a sequel or remake drifted through Hollywood like rumors carried on the wind, always vanishing before they could form. Scripts were written and abandoned, directors courted and dismissed. It was as though the film itself resisted being reborn, as though storms on screen could not match the storms that swirl behind closed studio doors. When it finally came to life under the guidance of a new generation, it felt almost uncanny, like a funnel cloud finally touching ground after circling unseen for years. Another strange fact lies in its timing. The world into which Twisters emerged is not the same as 1996. In that earlier era, disaster films thrive in a culture intoxicated by spectacle. Today, the context is sharper. Climate change hovers like a permanent storm over every conversation. This film, whether intentionally or not, became entangled in that discourse. Its release was discussed not only as entertainment, but as allegory, a story about the violence of weather arriving in a decade defined by wildfires, hurricanes, and floods. What was once escapism now feels like prophecy, and the strangeness lies in how cinema accidentally collided with reality's rising temperature. Behind the scenes, the production itself weathered storms, literal ones. Cast and crew filming in rural Oklahoma and other plain states often found themselves halted by real tornado warnings. There were days when the fictional sirens on set blurred with real ones outside, when actors rehearsed lines about running from storms only to be shepherded into shelters as skies darkened. These moments gave the film an eerie authenticity, its drama fed by the weather it tried to capture. Some crew members later joked that nature itself was a co-director, reminding them who truly owned the stage. Even casting carries peculiarities worth noting. The lead role, the meteorologist, was initially rumored to be attached to several different young stars before the final choice was made. Industry gossip spoke of scheduling conflicts, sudden withdrawals, and mysterious shifts, as if the role itself demanded to be elusive until it found the right vessel. When the chosen actor finally stepped into the role, many remarked how uncanny the fit was, as though their own personal history of loss and resilience echoed to the character they played. The film's commitment to practical effects is another curious fact. In an era when CGI dominates, the production invested heavily in physical stunts, wind machines, and real debris launched across sets. Entire neighborhoods were built only to be torn apart, barns constructed to collapse in camera-ready fashion, vehicles flipped by hidden rigs. While digital artistry shaped the massive funnels, much of the grit, the splintered wood, the shattered glass, the bodies hurled into fields was tangible. This blending of old-school chaos with modern technology created an odd marriage, a film that looks cutting-edge but smells faintly of the dust and diesel of its predecessor set. Among the strangest production anecdotes is the fate of the twister drones, small machines designed to be tossed into winds for close-up shots. Many of these drones were lost forever, swept into the sky during real gusts or smashed against trees and rooftops. Some local residents even found remnants days later. Cracked cameras lie in fields, surreal souvenirs of a Hollywood storm colliding with real Midwestern life. For a while, farmers joke about harvesting drones alongside wheat. Another unusual thread is how locals became part of the film. In towns where the crew shot, residents not only acted as extras but lent their homes, barns, and businesses to be destroyed for camera. Some families even had mock versions of their houses built nearby, only to watch them spectacularly torn apart by stage storms. The odd intimacy of watching a replica of your own living room explode in wind and fire must have left a strange aftertaste. Fiction and reality layered like debris fields. The marketing carried its own eccentricities. The studio leaned into storm warnings, releasing teaser posters designed like weather alerts, using sirens and trailers, and even staging promotional events where audiences sat in theaters blasted by artificial gusts of wind. Some complained it was gimmicky, others loved it, but all agreed it blurred the line between movie and experience, between watching a storm and feeling one tug at your hair. The strangest facts, though, are often the ones that circle quietly. There were whispers that meteorologists consulted on the film sometimes clashed with directors, arguing over accuracy versus drama. In one case, a scientific advisor reportedly walked off set after a heated dispute about whether tornadoes could truly behave as depicted. The production pressed on, but the tension left a mark, an echo of the very conflict the film dramatizes, the gap between science and spectacle. And then there's the eerie coincidence that, during post-production, several severe tornado outbreaks struck parts of the United States, leaving devastation uncannily similar to sequences in the film. News footage resembled scenes that had only just been edited, making viewers wonder if cinema was imitating life or if life was responding to cinema. For survivors of those storms, watching Twisters was said to be unsettling, less entertainment than a mirror of their own trauma. When the film finally premiered, another oddity arose. Audiences in different regions reacted differently, almost as though culture itself shaped the experience. In storm-prone states, the movie played like a horror story, too close to home. In coastal cities, it played as high adventure, thrilling, and distant. Overseas, it was read as allegory, a tale about human arrogance in the face of nature. Few films fracture perception in quite that way, their meanings shifting like weather depending on where you stand. The strangest fact of all, perhaps, is how deeply personal the film feels despite its scale. For all the CGI, the roaring winds, the grand destruction, what lingers are not the storms or the faces inside them. The meteorologist staring into the vortex, the veteran trembling with unspoken grief, the influencer breaking in the moment of sacrifice. These are not facts in the usual sense, but they are truths nonetheless. The odd truth that spectacle is forgotten while humanity, fragile and flickering, endures. When Twisters opened, the first gust that hit was anticipation. Critics entered the theaters carrying memories of the 1996 original like baggage, comparing every shot, every line, every swirl of wind to the film that had defined disaster cinema for a generation. Some arrived with skepticism, convinced that nothing could equal the awe of the first. Others arrived with hunger, eager to see whether modern technology could finally give us storms that felt as uncontrollable as the ones nature had already shown us. The perspectives fractured even before the film began, and that fracture would only deepen once the lights dimmed and the wind started to howl. For many, the film's strength lay in its refusal to be only spectacle. Critics and major outlets remarked on how strange it felt to be genuinely invested in the people, not just the storms. The meteorologist at the center, portrayed with trembling humanity, drew praise for being neither invincible hero nor reckless daredevil, but something closer to the truth, a haunted survivor chasing meaning. Writers noted that disaster films often reduce their characters to archetypes. But here, the character's fragility gave the destruction weight. When a barn collapsed, when a truck was hurled into the sky, it wasn't just debris. It was a background to someone's grief. But not all saw it this way. Some voices accused the film of leaning too heavily on melodrama, of stretching backstories too far in an attempt to force intimacy into what should have been raw adrenaline. They argued that storms are storms, not metaphors, and that the insistence on turning each funnel cloud into a reflection of trauma weakened the immediacy of the chase. These reviews came especially from publications that prize spectacle, and their tone suggested disappointment that the film hadn't embraced the sheer absurdity of destruction the way the original had. Audiences, too, split along lines that revealed as much about culture as about cinema. In the Midwest, where tornadoes are lived reality, screenings were tense, almost reverent. People sat quietly, murmuring when scenes too closely mirror their own experiences, the destruction of towns too familiar. For them, the film was not escape but echo, and their reviews reflected discomfort more than thrill. By contrast, coastal and overseas audiences treated it as adventure, clapping at close calls, laughing nervously when cows were flung skyward, treating it as a ride. The same scenes, the same storms, carried entirely different meanings depending on the soil beneath the audience's feet. The premiere itself added to the swirl of events. Held in Los Angeles under skies that happened strangely to darken with rare summer thunderclouds, the screening was accompanied by a marketing stunt. Fans walked into theaters through wind tunnels, gusts whipping their hair, lights flashing like lightning. Some found it clever, others thought it crass. But the memories stuck, the film already being framed not just as a story but as experience. Critics returned again and again to the theme of relevance. In a world marked by climate anxiety, could a tornado film be anything but allegory? Writers and environmental journals seize upon Twisters as metaphor, interpreting the storms as symbols of a planet lashing back against arrogance. Political commentators, too, use it as shorthand, invoking its imagery in discussions of policy and preparedness. The film had slipped out of cinema into discourse, becoming a cultural event far larger than box office numbers. Controversy, of course, followed. Some meteorologists praised the attention the film brought to their field, even if dramatized. Others scorned its inaccuracies, pointing out scenes where storms behaved impossibly or where technology was exaggerated beyond plausibility. A few even worried that it glamorized reckless storm chasing, inspiring amateurs to rush toward danger without understanding the risks. In online forums, debates flared between fans who defended its artistry and experts who dismissed it as dangerous fantasy. The storm on screen had become a storm in commentary. Film festivals added another layer. Shown out of competition at a major European festival, the movie was met with polite but divided applause. Critics there spoke less about tornadoes and more about archetypes, reading the influencer characters as satire of modern culture, the veteran chasers as elegies for a bygone era. The film, they suggested, was less American than it seemed, carrying universal themes about human arrogance, grief, and the futility of control. Strangely enough, what seemed melodramatic to American critics read as mythic abroad. the storm becoming an allegory for fate itself. The audience events that followed were almost as dramatic as the movie. At one screening in Kansas, real sirens interrupted the credits, sending the audience into shelters beneath the theater. Some later described it as surreal, as though the movie had summoned a storm. In Oklahoma, survivors of real tornado outbreaks attended together, clutching one another during scenes that mirror their own trauma. For them, the movie became something close to therapy, painful but strangely necessary, a way of facing memories through fiction. The critical consensus that formed in the months after was paradoxical. The film was both praised and criticized for the same qualities. Its seriousness was seen as depth by some, excess by others. Its spectacle was thrilling for some, overwhelming for others. Its cultural moment was undeniable. Think pieces and major outlets dissected it as if it were a text in a literature class, but its ultimate legacy was uncertain. Would it be remembered as a worthy successor, or as a curiosity of its decade? And yet, beyond the reviews and events, the strangest perspective came from the audience itself, whose reactions defied neat summary. Some walked out shaken, muttering about how fragile life feels in the face of weather. Others left exhilarated, grinning, their adrenaline still racing. Children mimicked the funnel clouds with their hands. Couples argued about whether they would chase storms together or run the other way. Elderly viewers shook their heads at the folly of youth. The film had not given them answers, but had given them reflection, and in that sense achieved something rarer than box office glory. It became part of personal memory. In the end, the critical perspectives and movie events around Twisters became their own narrative. They told us as much about ourselves as the movie did, that we crave spectacle but fear it, that we long for stories that mirror our grief but resent them when they cut too close, that cinema is never just about what is on screen, but about where and when it lands. The storms may belong to film, but the meanings belong to us, scattered, colliding, unresolvable, as unpredictable as the winds themselves. What most people see in Twisters is wind and debris, but behind that spectacle is an army of people wrestling with their own storm, the production itself. The film was not an easy one to bring to life. Studios have been circling the idea of a sequel or reboot for decades, scripts piling up in drawers like radar reports waiting for the right reading. Directors came and went, some eager to make the storms bigger, others too wary of being trapped in the shadow of a beloved original. It wasn't until a fresh creative team, unburdened by nostalgia yet respectful of it, finally came together that the project found traction. The very fact that Twisters exists is itself a small miracle, a storm that gathered only after years of scattered clouds. The strangest part of production is how much of it was shaped by real weather. Shooting in Oklahoma and surrounding plains meant the crew was constantly at the mercy of the sky. Entire shooting days were rearranged because real tornado warnings forced evacuations. Some actors later described the bizarre experience of filming scenes of fictional storms only to huddle in real shelters when sirens wailed outside. It blurred the boundary between cinema and reality, giving the cast a visceral sense of the fear their characters were meant to portray. In interviews, some admitted that they didn't have to act when the wind machines roared, because memories of actual gusts still lingered in their muscles. The production design leaned heavily into practical effects, which is itself unusual in the CGI-dominated age. Trucks were built to withstand blasts of air powerful enough to flip them, barns constructed only to be shredded on camera, debris cannons designed to fling splinters and glass convincingly into the wind. Crew members walked away bruised more than once, hit by stray planks or pebbles launched at terrifying speeds. But there was a philosophy behind it. Storms are tactile, not weightless pixels. By mixing CGI for the vast funnels with physical chaos on set, the filmmakers gave the destruction a heaviness that audiences could feel in their bones. Fun facts drifted out of the set like tumbleweeds. One was the story of the drone cameras designed to fly into storm simulations. Many of them never returned, carried off by real gusts or smashed against trees, vanishing into the countryside. Locals later reported finding cracked shells of these drones in fields, like strange metallic insects scattered by weather. Farmers kept them as souvenirs, proof that a Hollywood storm had once touched their land. Another fact, the cows that fly in the film, and homage to the famous scene from 1996, were created with a blend of practical rigs and digital layering. Crew members joked that they had auditioned the best fake cows in the business, some of which were rubber molds suspended by cranes, swinging wildly in gusts from giant fans. The cast bonded through these ordeals in unusual ways. Long nights spent filming in artificial rain, freezing under wind machines, turned into rituals of camaraderie. They shared blankets between takes, swapped ghost stories about storms, and in one case, reportedly played poker in a half-collapsed set barn while waiting for weather to clear. These details never appear on screen, but they seep into performances, giving the characters exhaustion and closeness and authenticity no script could create. The director insisted on authenticity, even in small details. Real meteorologists were brought on as consultants, some of whom argued fiercely with the writers about accuracy. One storm scientist was so frustrated by a dramatized sequence that they left the set muttering that audiences would believe tornadoes behave like monsters rather than weather. But others stayed, shaping dialogue, explaining radar patterns, even teaching actors how to squint at skies with the wary eyes of people who live under constant threat. These clashes revealed the eternal tension between science and spectacle, a theme that echoed in the film itself. There were also eerie coincidences. While the movie was in post-production, severe tornado outbreaks struck parts of the U.S., with news footage that looked uncannily similar to edited scenes. Cast and crew admitted to feeling chilled, as if they had summoned something real. Marketing teams debated whether to lean into the timing or to tread softly, ultimately choosing to acknowledge the parallels respectfully, framing the movie not as fantasy but as reflection. The fun extended into promotion. At premieres, audiences were funneled through wind tunnels blasting gusts, hair whipping, clothes rattling, before entering theaters. Trailers were released online with flashing weather alerts, and some theaters even staged synchronized rumblings and light effects during screenings. Critics called it gimmicky, but audiences laughed nervously, drawn deeper into the blur between fiction and reality. Perhaps the oddest production insight is how locals became entwined in the film. Towns opened their doors to crews, some even allowing replicas of their homes to be built and destroyed on nearby lots. For families, it was surreal to watch a mirror their own house collapse in fire and splinters, even as their real living room sat intact just down the road. Children of these towns often lingered at set perimeters, eyes wide, watching trucks lifted on rigs, actors screaming into cameras, cows swinging in cranes. For them, the movie was not Hollywood arriving, but weather given shape. Every film leaves behind debris of memory, but with Twisters the debris is literal. Pieces of sets were gifted to locals, drones scattered across fields, props left behind in barns. The fun facts live on in stories told in diners and bars. The night the Hollywood crew evacuated with townsfolk, the afternoon when thunder drowned out the director's megaphone, the time a fake cow nearly crashed into a real tractor. These anecdotes make the movie larger than the screen, embedding it in the culture of the very land it portrays. And so the production insights and fun facts of Twisters form their own storm, one that swirled through years of delays, clashing egos, real storms, broken drones, bruised crew members, and uncanny coincidences. To watch the film is to see tornadoes on screen. To know how it was made is to realize that the storm began long before cameras rolled and will linger long after credits fade. The setting of Twisters is not simply backdrop. It is character. The plains of America stretch across the screen with a strange paradox. Emptiness that feels suffocating, vastness that feels claustrophobic. From the first wide shots, the land is presented not as neutral ground, but as a stage already primed for violence. Grass bends in winds that have not yet arrived. Skies sag with weight that hasn't yet broken. Roads stretch like fragile veins across a body too large to heal. The film takes care to situate us in this geography of fragility, where a storm is not intrusion, but inevitability. The cinematography draws its power from contrast. One moment we are staring at sunlight-piercing clouds, children riding bicycles through small towns, dogs barking against fences. The next, we are swallowed by black walls of sky, the screen bruised with shades of green and gray that signal approaching terror. The film's visual palette thrives on this duality. Calm so beautiful it feels unnatural, and violence so total it feels godlike. There's a rhythm to it, as though the camera itself breathes with the weather. Inhale in the quiet, exhale in the fury. Sound design is equally crucial. The roar of wind dominates, but it is layered with unsettling subtleties. Doors rattling before storms, The faint whine of sirens carried over fields, the groan of metal as pressure shifts. In theaters, you feel in your chest the bass frequencies vibrating like a warning deep in bone. Silence is used as weapon too. Moments just before funnels touch down are stripped of score, leaving only the whisper of leaves, the hush of frightened breaths. When the sound finally erupts, it feels less like music and more like the earth screaming. Lighting is wielded like brushstrokes. Sunsets are painted in violent reds and oranges. Skies streaked with unnatural beauty that foreshadows catastrophe. Lightning rips across scenes with such intensity that for an instant we see every blade of grass, every terrified face, frozen like photographs. The storms themselves are presented not only as dark masses, but as living bodies of color. Shifting greens, swirling blacks, hints of purples that suggest something otherworldly. This attention to palette ensures the storms are never generic. Each has its own identity, its own mood. The setting of towns, too, carries weight. Houses are small, fragile things, their siding flimsy against the vast sky. Barns stand alone like monuments waiting to be erased. Gas stations, diners, drive-in theaters, all appear in fleeting moments before storms consume them. These places are not shown as expendable, but as beloved, familiar spaces that ground the humanity of a story. Their destruction matters because they are drawn with affection first, only then torn apart. The cinematography often places the human figures at the mercy of scale. Wide shots dwarf characters against skies so immense that they look like ants on the edge of annihilation. Vehicles speed down roads that vanish into horizons, swallowed by clouds before the camera can follow. Even close-ups betray this imbalance. Raindrops battering windshields, reflections of funnel clouds growing in terrified eyes, hands trembling on steering wheels. The setting insists that humans are small, fragile, unable to command the land they pretend to map. Practical effects enhance the setting's tangibility. Debris is not just digital smears, but real wood, glass, and metal hurled across sets. Mud clings to actors' clothes. Artificial rain drenches them until their bodies shake with cold. The authenticity bleeds into the environment. Fields trampled into mud pits, roads cracked under rigs, barns reduced to rubble. Audiences can smell the dust, feel the grip between teeth, sense that what they are seeing is not just illusion but matter. The film also uses perspective in uncanny ways. Drones swoop into funnels, giving us angles no human could survive, but then the camera returns to ground level, clinging to the faces of characters sprinting through destruction. The alternation between impossible and intimate keeps us disoriented, much like storms themselves, sometimes observed from afar, sometimes too close to comprehend. This play with perspective transforms the setting into something unstable, never quite knowable, always threatening to shift beneath us. Night storms provide some of the most haunting imagery. Funnels made visible only by lightning flashes, silhouettes of barns exploding in darkness, headlights swallowed by walls of rain. The absence of light becomes part of the setting, as frightening as any funnel cloud. In these sequences, the viewer strains to see, heart pounding, sharing the blindness of those on screen. It is a reminder that storms are not only destructive but disorienting, stripping away sight and sound until survival becomes instinct. The cinematic language also borrows from horror. Camera movements linger too long on still skies. Frames hold on shadows that do not move. Sound drops out in moments where we expect chaos, building dread. In one unforgettable sequence, the camera follows a child staring at clouds that twist above, holding on her innocent gaze until the sky cracks open. The use of dread, suspense, and release gives the storm's narrative weight beyond spectacle. They are antagonists, villains, forces of personality. Even the costumes and props are part of setting. The veteran chasers' vehicles look scarred, patched with metal plates, dented from past encounters. The influencer team's trucks gleam with decals and mounted cameras, absurdly slick against the mud. The meteorologist's gear, worn notebooks, battered laptop, radar screens flickering, feels lived in, suggesting years of obsession. These details ground the world, making it believable before it collapses. And then there are the skies. The skies are the true stage. They dominate the film in every frame, not empty but heavy, pregnant with possibility. Even when calm, they carry menace. Clouds tower like cathedrals, Shafts of sunlight cut through them like blades. Horizons bend under their weight. The film treats sky not as background, but as character, always watching, always threatening, always larger than anyone beneath it. The setting and cinematic elements of Twister succeed because they never let us forget our scale. They remind us that storms are not inventions of cinema, but realities of land, and that no amount of technology or bravado can make us bigger than the sky. The wind, the light, the sound, the texture of mud and rain, they are all woven into the fabric of the story until setting becomes not where things happen, but why they matter. What we saw on screen was storm and fury, but behind the cameras was another kind of storm. The production itself, unruly, unpredictable, stitched together by grit and accident. Filming in the plains meant that cast and crew were never in full control. Real weather constantly intruded on the fiction. There were days when rehearsals were called off because the sky itself threatened to produce tornadoes. Crew members found themselves huddled in basements or makeshift shelters, radios crackling with reports that felt unnervingly close to the lines being spoken in the script. For the actors, these moments blurred boundaries. Was this acting or living through the very thing they were pretending to fear? Many later confessed that the realism in their performances was born not from method training, but from having felt the ground shake under a real storm while waiting for the director's cue. The set itself was engineered, like a battlefield. Wind machines the size of trucks roared with such violence that conversation was impossible once they started. Debris cannons hurled splinters, dirt, and shattered glass across constructed neighborhoods designed to be obliterated. Crew wore goggles between takes, picking pieces of grit from hair and clothes, while makeup teams fussed over bruises that were sometimes real and sometimes painted on. More than once, cameras had to be reset because mud clung to lenses or because water shorted out equipment. Filmmaking became less about direction and more about survival, and that sense of being at the mercy of elements seeped into the film's atmosphere. Behind the camera, tension simmered between departments. The visual effects team, eager to push CGI to dazzling heights, sometimes clashed with practical effects crews who insisted that nothing digital could replicate the weight of debris striking metal. The director walked a delicate line, promising spectacle to executives while defending grit for the sake of authenticity. These clashes occasionally erupted into shouting matches on set, but they also pushed the film to become something unique, a marriage of old-school physical chaos and modern digital wizardry. Actors forged bonds in strange ways. The veteran playing the seasoned storm chaser often slipped into mentor mode offset, guiding younger cast members not just through dialogue but through exhaustion. There were long nights when temperatures plummeted and rain soaked every layer of clothing, when extras shivered and cameras jammed. In those hours, camaraderie became survival. They sang songs between takes, shared whiskey in paper cups, even played cards in wrecked barns waiting for lights to reset. These off-camera rituals gave them a closeness that later radiated on screen. Their bickering, their laughter, their silences all carried the weight of shared endurance. Locals became part of the behind-the-scenes world, too. Farmers rented their fields for filming. Diners served as meeting points. Families opened barns for equipment storage. Some townspeople were cast as extras, walking out of ruined houses or clutching children as debris rained down. Others became impromptu crew, hauling props, steadying lights, even helping to reset debris fields after takes. For weeks, their lives intertwined with Hollywood chaos, and many later told stories of how strange it was to eat breakfast in a diner full of actors covered in fake dirt and blood, waiting to run into storms again. Even stranger were the coincidences that haunted the set. On more than one occasion, weather patterns during shooting eerily mirrored scripted storms. Clouds gathered with such precision that some shots required no CGI at all. Real skies became the backdrop, captured with awe and unease. Crew members joked that they had summoned the weather, though some whispered nervously that the land itself was responding. When tornado sirens interrupted a night shoot, the laughter faded, replaced by the chilling sense that art and reality were converging too closely. The behind-the-scenes also carried lighter stories. One prop cow, designed to swing from a crane for a homage scene, became a running joke among crew. They named it, dressed it in hats between takes, even placed it in chairs during rehearsals. The absurdity of a rubber cow floating through storm machines kept morale alive during grueling nights. In another incident, An actor was nearly knocked flat by a piece of flying plywood, only to laugh hysterically after discovering it was styrofoam painted to look like timber. These moments of humor softened the edges of production that was otherwise as relentless as the storms it portrayed. Editing brought its own hidden dramas. Hours of footage were pored over by exhausted editors, some of whom confessed that they began dreaming in storms, hearing wind even in silence. Scenes were rearranged dozens of times to balance human drama with spectacle, to make sure the storms never swallowed the people at their center. Studio executives pushed for faster pacing, while the director fought for moments of silence. Every cut was a negotiation, and the version that reached theaters was a product of months of argument, compromise, and stubborn vision. And then there was the music. Composers spent nights layering orchestral swells with distorted wind sounds, blending traditional scoring with recordings of storms captured in the field. The result was a soundtrack that often blurred into the roar of the storm itself, a soundscape that audiences felt in their bones. The fun fact whispered in interviews later was that some of the storm sounds weren't digital at all, but recordings of fans, industrial machines, and even slowed-down animal noises woven into the mix. It was less composition than alchemy, creating a score that felt alive, untamable. The behind-the-scenes of Twisters is a story of obsession, endurance, and accidents that became miracles. It was production that tested everyone involved, that left crew exhausted and battered, but also strangely bonded. They chased storms together not just on screen, but in real life, and what they endured became the invisible layer of the film. The grit on actors' faces, the tremor in their voices, the heaviness of every storm. Those were not illusions, but memories smuggled onto the screen. And when audiences sat in dark theaters watching destruction unfold, they were unknowingly watching echoes of real wind, real exhaustion, real fear. The storm behind the storm had left its mark. The film tells us about storms, but storms are never just weather. They are metaphors, mirrors, and prophecies. From the first frame, the tornado is cast not merely as wind, but as memory. For the young meteorologist at the center, every cloud is the echo of a night when family was ripped away, when survival became indistinguishable from guilt. The tornado is grief, circling endlessly, returning each season, never quite gone. This symbolism runs quietly through the film. Storms as manifestations of trauma. Each funnel cloud is shape given to what the heart cannot let go. To chase storms, then, is to chase loss, to pursue what can never be recovered, as if proximity to destruction might offer understanding. But storms are also arrogance. The influencers who drive toward them with cameras and smiles are chasing validation, proof that they can tame the untamable through spectacle. Their pursuit symbolizes our culture's hunger to commodify even the most destructive forces, to turn survival into content. The storm, in this sense, becomes judgment, a reminder that nature is not performance, that its violence cannot be reduced to a highlight reel. Their downfall is not coincidence. It is punishment for treating catastrophe as stage. The tornado here symbolizes the futility of control, the inevitable collapse of pride. For the veteran chasers, storms are obsession. They symbolize not only danger but identity. Having devoted their lives to studying and confronting tornadoes, they no longer know who they are without them. Their armored trucks, their patch maps, their worn hands all suggest a life consumed. The storm for them is not only an enemy but a partner, the thing that has defined their existence. In this, the tornado becomes a symbol of addiction, of devotion, so deep it borders on worship. They chase not because they choose to, but because to stop will be to face the emptiness left behind. The symbolism widens further when we consider the landscape. The plains are shown as vast, empty, vulnerable. Homes are fragile, barns solitary, towns scattered like bones across fields. In this setting, storms symbolize not just grief or arrogance, but the truth of human smallness. We build, we plan, we measure, but the horizon remains larger than us, the sky forever heavier. Each sequence of destruction is a reminder that our structures, wood, metal, ambition, are thin skins stretched against inevitability. The storm becomes a symbol of humility, forcing us to acknowledge our scale. Yet there is also rebirth in these storms. After destruction, the land clears, skies open, communities rebuild. Children run through fields again, laughter returns in fragments. The story becomes not only death but renewal, a violent cleansing that strips away illusion and forces fresh beginnings. This cycle, the calm, the storm, the ruin, the rebuilding, becomes symbolic of life itself, of the patterns of loss and healing, of endings that insist on being beginnings too. Sound and silence carry their own symbolism. The roar of the storm is chaos, but the silence before it is almost more terrifying. That silence symbolizes anticipation, the moments in life where we know something is coming but cannot see its shape. Characters hold their breath. The world holds its breath. And we are reminded of how much of existence is waiting for impact. When the roar finally comes, it is not just weather but revelation, a force that makes the invisible visible, the hidden fear exposed in dust and debris. Even relationships are woven into this symbolic web. The meteorologist pull between the veteran chasers and the influencers symbolizes a human split between responsibility and recklessness, between discipline and desire. Their eventual acceptance of survival over obsession is not just character growth. It symbolizes reconciliation, the moment when grief ceases to dominate and becomes memory instead. The influencer's sacrifice in the climax symbolizes redemption, the possibility that even arrogance can be burned clean in the fire of selflessness. The veteran's final act of devotion symbolizes the cost of obsession, a life given fully to the storm. On a broader level, Twisters carry symbolic weight as commentary on our age. Released in a world marked by climate anxiety, the storm symbolizes our collective unease, our recognition that nature is shifting faster than we can adapt. The unpredictability of the funnels, their frequency and ferocity, mirrors the unpredictability of modern disasters. Wildfires, floods, heat waves that no longer fit our models. The tornado becomes symbol not just of individual grief, but of planetary upheaval, a reminder that the storm is not waiting on the horizon. It is already here. Even the film's most playful symbol, the flying cow, carries resonance. In the original 1996 movie, it was spectacle, a moment of awe and absurdity. Here, it becomes echo, a reminder of legacy, of how images survive across decades. It symbolizes continuity, the way stories and fear spiral through generations like storms across seasons. In the end, the deepest symbolism of Twisters is survival. Not triumph, not conquest, not control, just survival. To crawl out of wreckage, to take another breath, to rebuild when everything is gone. The tornado strips away pride, grief, and illusion, leaving only endurance. In this way, the storm becomes not just a symbol of destruction, but a truth. The naked truth that to live it all is to survive storms, to keep walking into winds and out of them again. The film feels like a storm, but storms are illusions built from dozens of tricks. Twisters 2024 thrives on its ability to convince us that we are watching chaos unfold naturally, when in reality every gust of wind and every splinter of wood was engineered. The filmmaking techniques relied on a hybrid language, practical effect to anchor us in tangible destruction, digital effects to expand the scale beyond what machinery could conjure. This marriage is what makes the movie feel both modern and classic. When a barn is shredded on screen, part of it truly is wooden beams blasted apart by cannons of air and fire. But the funnel cloud consuming, it is crafted from pixels, built frame by frame to mimic the role of real vortices. The weight comes from the practical, the awe from the digital, and together they create the illusion of inevitability. The camera itself becomes a chaser. It rarely sits still. Shots are handheld, jittering as though they too are caught in the wind. Drones plunge into funnels, giving audiences impossible perspectives before swooping back to ground level to clutch terrified faces in close-up. The editing stitches these extremes into rhythm, wide to intimate, sky to eye, grand to fragile. The effect is that we are never allowed comfort. Just as we adjust to one scale, the movie rips us into another. It's the cinematic equivalent of standing in a field as a storm barrels closer, your gaze darting between the horizon and the hand clutched in yours. Sound is wielded with equal artistry. The roar of storms is recorded from real weather, layered with slowed-down engines, manipulated animal cries, and mechanical rumbles until it became less sound and more presence. Dialogue is often drowned, characters screaming into voids that consume their words. Silence, too, is weaponized. Just before a tornado descends, everything drops out. No birds, no breeze, no score. The absence unsettles, the ear straining for a sound that refuses to come. When the roar finally erupts, it overwhelms, as if silence had only been gathering strength. Lighting and color grade intensify this unease. The palette leans into bruised greens and grays, skies tinged with sickly hues that signal approaching disaster. Lightning strobes reveal destruction in snapshots, frames that burn into memory before vanishing. At night, storms are presented almost as horror, funnels visible only in flashes, headlights swallowed whole, the unknown pressing from every side. These visual choices are not accidental. They are deliberate symbols. Storm as predator, light as revelation. Performances are shaped by the filmmaking environment. Because practical effects drenched the set in water and hurled debris, actors reacted to stimuli that were real. Their gasps, their squints, their shivers were not rehearsed but instinctive. This authenticity grounds the spectacle, reminding us that amid the technology, our bodies enduring cold, weight, and exhaustion. The directing style encourages rawness, prioritizing immersion over polish, letting actors stumble, shout over noise, even break lines under pressure. It is messy, but it is honest, and that honesty feeds the illusion that the storms are real. Editing techniques also deserve notice. The film resists long build-ups without payoff. Every storm sequence is cut with mounting rhythm. Radar screens flashing, sirens wailing, trucks starting, clouds spiraling, then sudden bursts of chaos. Yet between storms, the editing slows, giving characters moments of reflection and doubt. This contrast ensures that audiences never acclimate. Just as we begin to breathe, the pace accelerates again. It is storm logic applied to narrative. Calm, escalation, release, ruin. Box office production is the other half of the tale. The film was marketed not simply as entertainment, but as event. Trailers arrived disguised as weather alerts, television spots interrupted by sudden sirens, posters designed like emergency warnings. At premieres, audiences walked through wind tunnels, hair whipped into chaos before they even entered the theater. These tactics blurred boundaries, making Twisters feel less like a movie and more like a storm channeled into pop culture. The gamble worked. Opening weekends drew massive crowds, partly out of nostalgia for the 1996 film, partly out of curiosity about whether modern filmmaking could outdo the past. Box office numbers surged in the first week, especially in the U.S., where memories of real tornadoes lend a film urgency. International markets responded more cautiously, but still strongly, fascinated less by storms themselves and more by what they symbolized. America's obsession with disaster, its struggle with nature. Analysts noted that the film's earnings far exceeded projections, crediting both clever marketing and the cultural moment. In a decade already defined by climate anxiety, audiences seemed primed for a story where nature dwarfs human control. The financial story deepens with how the film sustained momentum. Repeat viewings were common, particularly among younger audiences drawn by influencer marketing. Hashtags tied to the movie trended on platforms, with fans staging their own storm challenges, standing in front of fans, or sprinklers to mimic scenes. Merchandise, from weather radios branded with the film's logo to replica chaser jackets, flew off shelves. The storm expanded beyond theaters into lifestyle, a peculiar blending of fear and fandom. Behind the financial success was risk. The budget ballooned due to practical effects, weather delays, and costly reshoots. Executives feared it would become another overambitious disaster film swallowed by expenses. But the final box office performance silenced doubts, turning what seemed reckless into triumph. The irony is clear. A film about the futility of controlling storms became a financial storm carefully engineered and miraculously steered to safety. Cinematically, the techniques leave legacy. Students of film will study how Twisters merged practical and digital effects seamlessly, how it used sound as character, how it treated setting as antagonist. Critics may argue endlessly over its narrative choices, but few deny its technical achievement. The movie becomes lesson as well as spectacle, a demonstration of how modern filmmaking can honor old traditions while pushing new boundaries. In the end, the filmmaking techniques and box office production of Twisters are mirrors of each other. Both are storms of planning, chaos, accidents, and survival. On screen, storms consume barns and highways. Off-screen, Storms consumed budgets and schedules, yet both resolved into endurance, into success carved from wreckage. The camera captured wind, the box office captured wallets. Together, they captured attention, and that, more than anything, proves that the storm was not only survived, it was harnessed, if only for a moment, before the sky inevitably darkens again. The cast of Twisters stepped into shoes that were heavy with legacy. The lead actor portraying the young meteorologist carried the film's fragile heart, and their performance was praised for a kind of trembling authenticity that made grief and obsession feel lived rather than performed. In interviews, they spoke of preparing by shadowing real meteorologists, learning the language of radar and wind, but they also admitted to drawing from personal loss. The storms, they said softly in one late-night interview, are just metaphors for what we can't control in our own lives. That's what I tapped into. This vulnerability resonated with audiences, who saw in their eyes not spectacle but survival. The veteran storm chaser was brought to life by an actor with decades of presence, a performer whose weathered face carried history without needing lines. In press events, they chuckled about the bruises earned on set, the mud that never quite washed out of clothes, the way wind machines age you 10 years in an hour. Yet when asked about the character's obsession, they grew serious. Everyone has their storm, they said. Mine just happened to be literal. Audiences admired how this role blurred fiction and reality, with critics noting that the actors seemed less like they were playing a part and more like they had been waiting for it all along. The influencer leader was cast against type, a young star known more for light comedies than for heavy dramas. At first, critics scoffed at the choice, but the performance proved unexpectedly layered. In interviews, the actor confessed being terrified of storms, saying they had to channel that fear into arrogance on screen. The bravado was my shield, they admitted. The shift from reckless spectacle seeker to self-sacrificing hero became one of the film's most talked-about arcs, with audiences surprised at how much they cared for a character they had expected to hate. The supporting cast filled the film with texture. Extras drawn from local towns gave authenticity, their accents and mannerisms grounding the drama. In interviews, many of them spoke of how close the fiction felt to reality, how they had lived through real tornadoes that looked exactly like what was being recreated. One farmer, who appeared briefly in a diner scene, told a story of watching a tornado rip through his land years ago, his voice breaking as he said, "It was the same sound." They got it right. These stories deepened the film's reception, reminding audiences that what they were seeing was not just cinema, but reflection of lived fear. Interviews with the director revealed the obsession that drove the project. They spoke of wanting to honor the original without repeating it, of wanting to merge spectacle with humanity. Storms are not villains, they said. They are mirrors. We put ourselves in them. Crew interviews added another dimension, with sound designers detailing how they layered slowed animal growls into tornado roars, and stunt coordinators describing near accidents when debris cannons misfired. These behind-the-scenes confessions fascinated fans, giving them glimpses of the invisible storms that shaped the visible ones. Audience reviews became storms of their own. In storm-prone regions, reactions were hushed, reverent, sometimes uneasy. "It felt too real," one Oklahoma viewer wrote, "like I was watching my own town again." Some praised the film as therapy, a way to face trauma safely. Others criticized it as exploitation, too close to wounds not yet healed. Coastal audiences responded differently, cheering in theaters, clapping at climactic moments, treating it as exhilarating spectacle. International reviews often read the film as allegory, a parable about arrogance and nature. In Japan, critics compared it to kaiju films, storms as monsters rising from the land. In Europe, it was called an American myth about control. Social media amplified the audience voice. Hashtags trended. Fans posted storm memes. Some staged mock chases in their neighborhoods with leaf blowers and sprinklers. Yet alongside humor were heartfelt confessions. Viewers spoke of losing relatives to real tornadoes, of crying during scenes where characters crawl from wreckage. The film had touched nerves, creating a strange mixture of entertainment and grief work, spectacle and memorial. What unites the cast interviews and audience reviews is a single truth. Twisters was never only about storms. It was about people, those who acted them, those who filmed them, those who survived them, and those who watched them. The cast lent their bodies and voices, the crew their sweat, the audience their memories. Together, they created not just a film but a cultural event, one where fiction and reality bled into each other until you couldn't tell which storm was on screen and which was outside the theater. And perhaps that is the greatest review of all, that the storm felt real because, in some sense, it always was. Cinema leaves us changed when it is honest, and Twisters, 2024, is a film that insists on honesty, even in its spectacle. We entered it with nostalgia, perhaps, expecting only a thrill, a return to cows flying and barns exploding. What we found instead was something heavier, a story about grief, arrogance, obsession, humility, and survival. Each section of this analysis has walked us deeper into that truth. Plot unfolding like thunder, characters revealed as fragile as torn fences, settings as vast as skies that stretch beyond our comprehension, symbolism circling like unseen winds, techniques engineered like architecture built against collapse. And now, at the end, what remains is not the roar of storms, but the quiet of reflection, the silence that follows when destruction is past and only memory remains. The movie's greatest gift is its insistence that storms are not enemies to be conquered, but truths to be endured. It reminds us that life is made not of victories over nature, but of survival through it. The young meteorologist's journey is our own, learning that grief cannot be erased by obsession, that survival is not shame but courage, that the act of breathing after loss is itself resistance. The veteran chaser teaches us the cost of obsession, that devotion to a storm may consume a life, and yet that same devotion may yield wisdom for those who follow. The influencer leader embodies the danger of treating catastrophe as spectacle, yet their final act of sacrifice reminds us that redemption is possible even in arrogance. These arcs intertwine until we realize that the storm was never antagonist. It was catalyst, the mirror that revealed each soul for what it was. Audiences responded with division because storms are divisive. For some, they are nightmares relived. For others, they are thrills enjoyed from safety. But the fact that the film could be both therapy and spectacle, grief and entertainment, is what proves its resonance. Cinema, like storms, is never one thing. It is what it becomes in the lives of those who witness it. Critics debated, audiences argued, survivors wept, children laughed at cows spinning in the sky, and in all these reactions we see the strange truth. The film was alive, unpredictable, uncontrollable, like the very weather portrayed. Behind the camera, the production lived its own storm. Cast and crew endured real sirens, real winds, real mud. Practical effects battered them. Digital artists stitched skies together. Editors lost sleep to storms of footage. Composers layered sound until it became atmosphere. The making of the film mirrored the film itself. Chaos endured, accidents transformed into meaning, survival achieved through endurance. When we watch the actors trembling and roar, we are watching not only performance but memory, bodies remembering the cold, the grit, the weight of wind machines that felt too close to the real thing. The storm on screen carries within it the storm off screen, and that double weight gives it gravity. Themes circle us still. The storm as grief, the storm as arrogance, the storm as obsession, the storm as humility, the storm as renewal. These are not merely interpretations, but resonances, echoes of truths we already know. We all have storms we chase, storms that haunt us, storms that strip us bare. To watch Twisters is to remember our own storms. Losses endured, risks taken, obsessions followed too far, pride humbled. And in remembering, we are reminded of survival. The storm does not end, but we walk out of it. That is a lesson. The filmmaking craft ensures we feel it in our bones. The sound, the light, the editing, the mix of practical and digital, all are not techniques alone, but languages, each saying the same truth, that we are small and fragile, that the sky is larger than us, that to live is to endure what we cannot control. Even the box office, with its storms of numbers, tells us something. That audiences are drawn to what reflects their fears, that cinema remains a place where culture gathers to face the uncontrollable together. The cast and crew carried this storm, and their voices and interviews remind us that they too were changed. They did not simply act storms. They lived them on set and in memory. And the audience, scattered across the globe, carried it further, writing their own reflections, turning cinema into conversation. Together, they ensure that Twisters is not just another disaster film, but a story that lingers, a storm that continues to circle even after credits fade. And so we arrive at the calm after. What remains is silence, but not emptiness. It is a silence of reflection, of survival, of having walked through wind and come out altered. Twisters is not perfect, nor does it try to be. Its storms are sometimes melodramatic, its characters sometimes archetypal, but none of that erases the truth at its core. That to live is to face storms, and to endure them is enough. That is why the film matters. That is why it will linger. My dear friends of literature and cinema, thank you for walking with me through this storm of analysis. If you have felt the winds in your chest, if you have recognized your own storms in these images, then let us not end here. Support Cinema Vault with a like, subscribe, and share your own reflections in the comments. Tell me about the storms you've endured, the storms you've chased, the storms you survived. This is not just a review. It is a conversation, a gathering after the storm, a reminder that though the skies will darken again, we never walk into them alone.